Hello, everyone. This is the first meeting of INTS 499 for the final presentations for the international studies students. I'm Sorin Nastasia. I'm the director of the program. Nancy Lutz is helping me this semester because I'm on my sabbatical. Thank you very much. And we will have students from 499 and some of their advisors being present on this Zoom meeting. I'm recording. I will try to save everything afterwards and then put it on a YouTube channel so everybody can see it later on. The schedule is that we will have different presentations in different days. Today we will have Carson Fricke and let me see, gallery view, and David Ruark. Yes. I don't know, did you establish an order? Who wants to go first? Carson?
Me. I'll go first, yeah.
Okay, we'll go with Carson and then David. Take it away.
Should I just share my screen and you guys can see it from there?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you guys see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll just go whenever, or do you need like a cue or something?
Yeah, you can start talking and you can go from slide to slide, I guess, with arrows.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll just go ahead. My name is Carson Fricke, and my project is about how joining the European Union has impacted Germany. So just kind of a quick where is Germany? Germany is located in Central Europe. It borders France, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic, Poland, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, all of whom are also EU members except for Switzerland. So real quick, a brief history of the European Union. The first iteration of the EU was the European Coal and Steel Community, formed in 1955. And the goal of this body was to further unite the European continent after the Second World War through economic and political means, just to kind of ensure a peace in Europe. The 6 founding members of the European Coal and Steel Community were Belgium, France, West Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. It was renamed to the European Union soon after the Treaty of Rome, sorry, I forgot the word, of Rome, that established it as the European Economic Community. So this is the EU today. The dark blue are the current EU members. The medium blue are the official current candidates, and the even lighter blue is the countries marked as potential future candidates. And the red is the recently departed candidates. So you can see the UK there. So this is a little slide that shows the stages of EU expansion. So you can see it started off with the original members and it expanded from there. The big expansion coming up is this one right here. Sorry, the next one. This one is the one that pushed the EU really far into Eastern Europe. And then this is the EU that we know it today in 2020. So why did Germany join the EU? Well, the 2 biggest reasons are for economic and political stability. So after the Second World War, Germany's economy was devastated. The majority of their factories were destroyed in Allied bombing raids over the country. The political stability. After the Second World War, Germany was a newly democratic nation. So EU membership helped entrench their democracy as well as build relationships with other European democracies. And then it also helped establish peace with their neighbors. Germany had historic rivalries with their neighbors like France and the UK. So some advantages, the EU membership to Germany, the 6 biggest ones in my opinion were agricultural, trade and economic, political advantages, the Franco-German relationship, which is kind of the cornerstone of the modern EU, defense, common defense, and international relations. And the biggest one is economic advantages. So like I said, Germany's economy was really devastated after the Second World War. So in about 60 years, Germany has gone from that devastated economy to the largest economy in Europe. And again, this is a huge part of that is due to their involvement in the EU, which gives them trade advantages and trade opportunities. The trade within the European Union accounts for 59% of Germany's exports, with France and the Netherlands being the largest partners. And then trade within the EU also accounts for 66 of Germany's imports. Again, France and the Netherlands are the biggest partners there. So the biggest advantage that it offers them is a huge market for the buying and selling of German goods. Like I said, the inner EU trade accounts for a lot of their exports. So these advantages do come with some disadvantages, and the biggest ones are, again, agriculture, limited control over internal laws, immigration and border control, loss of local culture, and economic disadvantages. And then for me, the biggest one was immigration and border control. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the immigration crisis. It's seen over 100,000 people travel to Europe every year since 2015. Many of these migrants see Germany as their final stop, just due to the the job opportunities, the strong economy of Germany, government assistance programs, and just kind of the overall willingness of the German government to accept these people into the country. Most of these people are coming from Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, and Iraq. So a lot of these countries that have seen war for a long time, looking for a more stable country to settle down in. Most of these people do not speak German, which causes a conflict in local areas when they refuse to learn or use the spoken language of the area. And it's been a major problem in Europe for the last 5 to 6 years. It says here that it was the leading reason for the UK to leave the EU. There's been talk in a lot of these European nations, France and Germany especially, about leaving the EU for the exact same reason. So this is a picture that shows the migrant crisis in numbers. As you can see, most of the asylum applications are in Germany, Hungary, Sweden, and Austria. Like I said, Germany is where a lot of these people see as their final destination. So in conclusion, there are many disadvantages and advantages to joining the European Union. The main advantages are agricultural, trade and economic opportunities, political advantages, the Franco-German relationship, common defense, and international relations. Like I said, these benefits don't come without drawbacks, though. The main disadvantages are agricultural, limited control over internal laws, immigration and border control, loss of local culture, and economic advantages. And these are all my references. It's kind of hard. If you want to screenshot it and look at them, you can. Otherwise, does anybody have any questions or comments? Get back to the screen.
Did you see any major efforts by the German government to sort of teach these immigrants German, to trying to think of the word, integrate them?
To integrate them, yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of programs. Obviously, German is the language spoken in school, so it kind of happens naturally. If these immigrants have children, their children are obviously going to go to German schools, so they would learn German there. As far as for the adults that already don't know German, it's not a legal requirement, but it's the same as in the US. If you don't speak the language, it's going to be harder to employ you. So there's that economic incentive, I guess would be the word, to kind of make them learn German.
When have you been in Germany? What year?
We go a lot. So the most recent I was there was 2018.
And what was your personal experience with what you could see in person about this integration, or if the people are keeping separate from Muslim minorities, or are they getting integrated? I remember that I did some research that, Angela Merkel organized, German style, by negotiating with local mayors to integrate the newly coming immigrants, first to lodge them into big stadiums or repurposed buildings, especially big gyms or stuff like that. But then they had to spread them into the population little by little, 10 people there, 10 people there, because they didn't want to let them become an enclave. So what was your personal experience with that?
So we were visiting family, and my family lives in kind of a smaller town. We were in Munich, and that's when you see the majority of them. Munich's all the way, it's down south in Germany, so that's where the majority of them will pool up. They are pretty isolated from the rest of the community. You don't see them too often, except for a couple of them that would be out on the street somewhere. As far as for the housing and the lodging of them, I do remember that there was, like you said, the incentive for them to use like these big gyms and stuff, especially the soccer stadiums was where they housed a lot of them. And I know there's a lot of pushback from the local communities because these immigrants didn't leave these soccer stadiums in the best condition. I mean, they were living in them, so they weren't super concerned with keeping them clean or keeping things from being broken and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely in the bigger cities. As far as how they integrate them after that, I am not too sure on that. Like you said, it's little by little throughout the population, so I imagine it's just kind of wherever the job is where they'll go.
I took a group of students from SIE in 2012 to Munich and Budapest. And downtown Munich, one day we saw a big group of Muslim people. I guess they were established before this wave of immigration. And they were all, you know, especially women dressed in black with burqas and covered totally. And there was no, you know, haggling or what's the word, harassing them from the local population or something like that. So that's one level of, you know, visual perception. But on the other hand, I read some articles in recent years, in the past 10 years, I understand that the local judges in Germany, when they were presented with cases in which, for example, a Muslim woman was beaten by her husband, they concluded that actually the Sharia law or the law of the community takes more value than the German law, which really baffled me how that was possible. What was your experience with that? Did you hear about these things?
I haven't heard about that case specifically. It surprises me that was the outcome of the case. I think that just from talking to my family that lives in Germany, the general feeling about these people is, I mean, obviously nobody's going to go out and try and get rid of them themselves. It's more of a passive aggressive. They'd rather them not be there, but personally, they're not going to do anything to get them out of there. The big place where they kind of live in the meantime in Munich, especially, is a place called the English Gardens, which is basically Munich's. I'm trying to think of the word, the big park in New York, Central Park, that's the one. It's the same thing as that. They kind of just established themselves there. So that's where a lot of people go to kind of relax in the city. So I know that it's kind of a, you know, obviously they'd rather them not be there, but again, personally, they're not gonna go out there and make them leave.
Yeah, I'm trying. Sorry, Nancy.
I was looking, let me just jump in and answer part of Soren's question about the legal part. On where you have Sharia law and national law will always trump in criminal cases. But if it's a family law case, then it can be given to the parties to decide which way they want to go. So in this case, if both sides wanted to do it under Sharia law and that was okay, it didn't contradict German law, then they went ahead and let them do it. But it's only
the difference between a civil and a criminal case.
Or well, it's also family law versus you know, more serious offenses.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand it was the case of a battered woman. So how can she escape that marriage?
Right. I mean, yeah, she would have had to appeal to the national, you know, have lawyers appeal for her to the national law.
Wow. Okay. Any other questions from anybody else? Well, Nancy, do you declare yourself satisfied?
I am satisfied.
Okay, thank you, Carson. Then we'll move on to David.
Let me share my screen.
Just hover the mouse and at the bottom, there's a green button, share screen.
Yeah. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Make it full
And
screen.
is it the full screen version or then like the next line on the right side? You know what I mean?
We can see the slide and your notes on the side.
Okay, let me change that. There we go.
Yes.
All right, so I'm David. My project was about the American foreign policy in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2017. So that spans from the Bush to Obama presidencies. So as I'm fairly sure you're aware, in 2001, the beginning of the war in Afghanistan stemmed from the Al-Qaeda attack on the U.S. in New York and on the Pentagon. And pretty quickly after that, the war was announced. And throughout the war, there were three major goals that I identified by looking at State Department announcements and the words of the presidents. And those were first being the removal of the Taliban from power and the elimination of Al-Qaeda and its support structure from Afghanistan. This spanned from 2001, from the beginning of the war, to 2014, when there was an official end to the combat operations, and that was announced by President Obama in 2014. Then the second goal was to build a strong Afghan government that was founded on democratic principles. That also started in 2001 and has spanned throughout the war. And then there was the training of Afghan security forces to enable a U.S. withdrawal and to avoid a return of the Taliban to power, because then there would be a strong Afghan security force. That started it started earlier than 2010, but 2010 was the beginning of the major efforts towards that, and those have continued throughout the war as well. So the beginning of the war started with the announcement of Operation Enduring Freedom, and it began with multiple victories across Afghanistan and major cities like Kandahar, Kabul. But it also started with multiple failures. And for instance, in December of 2001, there was a raid on the Tora Bora cave complex where Osama bin Laden and other high-ranking Al-Qaeda members were hiding out after the beginning of the war. And that raid, there was a raid on that complex, which was run by coalition forces, but also largely Afghan forces. That failed partially because of the poor equipment and poor training of the Afghan forces as compared to coalition forces, and bin Laden and a lot of his high-ranking members escaped. And then in 2001, the very end, in December, the leader of the Taliban fled Kandahar, officially ending their rule in Afghanistan. And then after 2001, the fighting largely died down. There were sporadic operations and fighting to root out Al-Qaeda and Taliban strongholds. But outwardly to the American public, this seemed like a victory. And President Bush projected that era of victory in a speech aboard the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln in 2003. Below, as you can see on the left, a banner inscribed "Mission Accomplished." As we can see now, the mission was not accomplished. And during this time, many Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters fled to Pakistan or the mountains in Afghanistan. Another endemic problem that plagued the coalition forces was the poppy production. So if you're familiar with the plant, poppy is one of the main parts of opium. And Afghanistan is one of the largest poppy producers in the world, I believe, trumping other producers worldwide by 66% combined. So obviously the U.S. and coalition wanted to curb the poppy production, but that largely failed because the crop is very lucrative for the farmers. They tried to get them to change to soybeans and corn, that sort of thing. And some of those efforts did work, especially in the northern areas of Afghanistan. But in the southern portions of Afghanistan, closer to the border of Pakistan and the mountains in Daikundi, Uruzgan, and Zabul provinces, the increases more than made up for the loss in the northern portions. And so you could imagine how, with 66% of the Taliban's funding coming from poppy, how you would want to establish a strong pipeline of money. So with the with the large production in the south and its proximity to the fighters in the mountains in Daikundi and the aforementioned provinces, as well as Pakistan's border, you can kind of see a trend appearing here. So in 2005, there was another Taliban insurgence. And during this time, there was an operation called Moshtarek, which means together. And it was run with coalition forces and Afghan forces. And it was sort of a litmus test to see if Afghan forces were prepared to defend their country by themselves. So it started off very poorly even before it even began. They sent in Afghan National Army members to the city before it began to speak to the civilian population to try and figure out where the Taliban were in the city and figure out other information. But past failures led the civilians to not trust the Afghan National Police and Army, and so they either fed them false information or just didn't speak to them. And then this led to the Taliban leaving the city before the operation even began. I believe there were, of the few casualties, I think 3 were friendly fire incidents between Afghan Afghan army. And this sort of just exemplified the lack of Afghan preparedness to conduct the operations independently. And so joint operations did continue, but they were of smaller scale than Operation Moshtarek until 2014. So the second goal that I analyzed was nation building. So starting in 2001, the Bonn Agreement was formulated by the UN. And what they did was they invited a bunch of Afghan leaders to try and figure out a timetable of when they would employ certain nation building things such as writing a constitution and also just the formulation of the government itself. But there were a couple of things that it didn't address, such as tribal rivalries. So a large portion of Afghans' society is grouped into societal groups called QAWMs, QAWMS, which are sort of mostly ethnically homogenous groups, larger than families, but they group together. And there are issues between them, and the Bonn Agreement didn't address that at all. It didn't address poppy production, and it also didn't address the power of warlords who got money early in the war from the coalition by offering their services to protect convoys. Also, just the formulation of the government itself was harmed by the U.S. lobbying hard for a system that resembled the U.S. government, when possibly our NATO allies' governmental systems, where you have disparate parties having come together into a coalition to form a government, may have worked better in the politically diverse countries such as Afghanistan. On top of this, there were intelligence failures where different groups in the war wouldn't communicate with each other for different reasons. Non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross and other aid groups wouldn't share information because they were out of fear of being targeted. The Afghan National Police wouldn't share information because they wanted to minimize conflict in their area and to reduce their work. Public wouldn't share information because they didn't trust the government, and they possibly had ethnic ties to the insurgents if they were Pashtun. And the Karzai government didn't share information, or when it did, it was sometimes falsified information because they had ties to the Afghan drug trade and the insurgency. This caused the U.S. and coalition to make decisions without a full understanding of the situation, which weakened both their efforts and the Afghan government's security. On top of this, the government officials in Afghanistan are fairly corrupt. As of 2011, the only countries that were less corrupt than Afghanistan were North Korea and Somalia. Assuredly, opium's pervasiveness in the country has something to do with that, considering that those who control the money in a country largely control the power, especially when there's not a strong central government. And so those who control the money from the opium production are able to pay off Afghan National Police and government officials to either look the other way or to support them in their efforts. On top of that, massive embezzlement from government from the government has been documented, with $900 million being embezzled from the bank in Kabul, with $861 million being smuggled out of the country by those close to President Karzai, the Afghan president. As of 2017, there were advances made, but many things kept them back. So, for example, there was a democracy created, at least a semblance of one. Conditions for women did improve, and educational opportunities increased. However, the lack of a strong legal economy, the very little decrease in corruption, election fraud, a weakness of police, and inconsistency from leadership held the country back. And the final goal that I analyzed was the ceding of security responsibility. So ultimately, the goal of the United States late in the war is to leave Afghanistan a strong and stable country. To do this, they have to have their own security forces that are able to defend the country, so that we don't have to be there, being the US or the coalition forces defending them. So to that end, in 2010, the coalition formed the NATO training mission. But as we'll see, there were many roadblocks to the training. To start off with, there was a strong lack of funding, which meant that in some cases drills were run with broken weapons. I read one case in which recruits were to hold broken Soviet Kalashnikovs and point at a target and yell bang when they were supposed to fire in the drill. Just that sort of exemplifies the lack of equipment that they had. When they did get equipment, it often arrived late due to logistical difficulties with the poor management of the roads, or in some cases, improvised explosive devices built by the insurgents. And one of the endemic problems was that 80% of Afghan recruits were illiterate as of 2005. So for training for Afghan police and army, there's some basic requirements. I mean, not written down, but you have to be able to read a map to figure out where your exfiltration point is. You have to be able to read a manual to figure out how to fix a convoy truck if something breaks. These things simply weren't able to be done in these cases where a large portion of the Afghan recruits were illiterate. On top of this, there was large drug abuse among Afghan police and army. From 2009 to 2010, 9% of officers tested positive for THC, opiates, or methamphetamine. And the rates logically were higher in the southern provinces of Helmand, Zabul, and Paktika, where the production of opium was much higher, as was shown in the earlier map. And then once the crews are trained, there's really no assurance that they will stay in the forces. There's a large desertion issue because of two major factors that I found. One being the pay. The police are able to receive $240 a month, and that's the top tier if they're in combat situations. But the Taliban, on the other hand, can pay $250 to $300 a month. Coupling this with the lack of a sense of national identity as an Afghan person rather than as a Pashtun or a Tajik, there's really no reason for them, if they're just trying to support their family and their life, to work for the police rather than the higher paying Taliban. And so these factors led to an overall desertion rate of 30%, with some units reaching 50%. As of 2017, the military and police were too weak to defend themselves against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda insurgency. Because of this, or causing this, was the drug abuse, the illiteracy rates, and pay. So in conclusion, there have been advances made in Afghanistan with their democracy and rights for women, education, that sort of thing. But the problems behind it, the illiteracy, the poppy production, the corruption, undercut the gains. So just running through these really quickly, all of them had mixed results. The Taliban were removed from power, but both groups' fighters fled to safety in Pakistan and the mountains of Afghanistan. Nation building had mixed results with a democracy being established, but the form it took was both unrepresentative and inefficient, with corruption plaguing the voting process, the voters' illiteracy, and uninformed votes. And finally, building a strong Afghan police and military force failed. Their force numbers are promising, but 324,000 troops combined, but their effectiveness is very low with poor equipment and training. So at this point, do you guys have any questions?
So I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Carson, were you going to say something?
I was, but you can go ahead. You can go first.
Oh, I was just going to ask, okay, so David, if you were, now that you're an expert on U.S. policy in Afghanistan, if the Biden administration invited you to tell them what to do, what would you say?
I'd say that we should have I think we should have the objective of education and economic development, more so than any troop numbers or anything else, because if you educate the populace, you can build a strong police force, military force. You can have an informed populace that can vote in people that won't be corrupt. You'll have a greater knowledge base from which to develop, so that people can innovate, people can build businesses, things other than the warfare side of it. Thanks.
Can you
want
remind-
to unshare your screen so we can go back to the gallery
sure.
view.
Oh yeah, that was my works cited as well. Got a couple of those.
You just have to get out of the sharing screen. Go again at the
Oh,
bottom.
there it is, top of the screen there. All right.
Yes. I wanted to ask, can you remind us what is the components of the military force that is international military force now in Afghanistan, kind of number of troops from the United States and others?
Sure. So right now, I believe we're somewhere around the 6,000 mark as far as U.S. soldiers. My research really only went up to 2017, so I couldn't really tell you the specifics as far as coalition forces go. But yeah, from what I understand, there's around 6,000 U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan right now, mostly in a training capacity and in a embassy defense capacity.
And the recent orders from the United States were to withdraw some troops by the end of the year?
Yeah, there's been talk of that, and there's the potential for the current president to fully withdraw, which I think would be a mistake. But nevertheless, there's talks about it.
Carson, did you have a question before I get started?
Yeah, I had one. So thank you. You had mentioned that there were some pretty extreme supply issues. I know that probably the majority of the guns used there are remnants of when the Soviet Union invaded, which was 40 years ago. So are a lot of those guns still that old? If not, where are they getting these new guns from? Are they Afghan made? Are they American made?
Yeah. So a lot. I don't have statistics for you, but from what I've read, a good portion of them are still Soviet era. So they've got like AK-70 or AK-47s from the 60s and 70s, and largely 80s and 90s during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. But yeah, in recent years, there have been pushes for modern American-made weaponry to go to the Afghan army in particular. But yeah, the equipment issues are pretty bad, I'd say.
Yeah, there's a difference between actually firing a rifle and pointing it and yelling bang.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
David,
Yes.
Good job. I think you outlined stated goals of two administrations, basically,
Mm-hmm.
the Bush and the Obama administration, and then what the end result was of those on the ground. I was curious about those goals. were they, did they basically maintain? I mean, did the goals shift at all over the course of, we're talking 16 years, more or less?
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, I'd say so.
yeah.
You could almost say that the training of Afghan police and army and the elimination of Al Qaeda and the Taliban could be one that's sort of shifted over time. The nation building process for sure has changed, especially dealing with the different presidents that we've had in America and they've had in Afghanistan. But I'd say the overarching ideas behind them are the same. I don't think there's been a sea change in what we're actually trying to do overall.
Because that really strikes me. I mean, 60, you know, the adage that if you try to do the same thing
Definition
over
of
and
insanity.
it doesn't work, you know, what is that the definition of insanity or something?
Yeah.
I mean, 16 years. And I mean, some people might argue that things are, I mean, they're nominally better, but for some people they're not, you know, better. Like, so it makes me wonder whether those are actually their goals. You know, maybe I don't know, maybe the purpose is not ultimately to create, you know, a new country, which I think a lot of people would say is not actually feasible. I mean,
Sure.
does anybody really believe, you know, that you can actually build a new nation? And all the reasons why, most of these reasons have to do with Afghans, right? I mean, with the corruption, the intelligence failures, the poppy production, lack of preparedness, you know, lack of education. And in some ways it seems convenient for Americans to say, we tried, but the Afghans, you know, just weren't up to the job, right?
Yeah.
But I would, you know, I would think you might take a slightly more critical approach to what was the U.S. up to anyway? I mean,
Sure.
One of my understanding of how what I call the U.S. empire works these days is that war is profitable for American industry and American, you
Special
know,
interests.
the U.S. wouldn't be involved in so many, you know, disastrous wars actually.
Sure.
Were there not a reason, you know, and it doesn't seem like, I mean, there may be the intention to build new nations, but, you know, does anybody really believe that that's a possibility? So, but I understand, I mean, I think it's at least a good starting point to realize that these goals were never really achieved, and you know, that we should probably take the lesson. You know?
Yeah.
Somebody's not learning anything, or maybe they are, and we just most of us just don't realize it. I don't know.
One of the interesting things I didn't get a chance to look into, just based on the scope of the project itself already, was the beginnings of ISIS and how that might have influenced Afghan policy and how we addressed security in the country.
Well, and Al Qaeda, where are the origins of that?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, where are the origins of the Taliban, for that matter? I mean, the U.S. isn't blameless in terms of that. But I mean, I don't know where you go to find intention. I mean, you're not going to find them in the official papers of, you know, I mean, you're not going to find a document that says this is for the benefit of the military-industrial complex, and
Yeah,
So I understand. I mean, you've done a good job with what's available.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
I wanted to observe also, you know, the other point of discussion with these sometimes senseless, sometimes bottomless wars that America has been waging for the past 20 years or more. It's always this point of contention for politicians. If we are not there, somebody else, another power will establish a presence. The Russians will come back.
Sure.
The local powers, you know, Iran, Afghanistan, nuclear powers in that region who would come and manifest their influence in a country that is not as technologically advanced.
Mm-hmm.
One way or another, somebody will take advantage of that population through their own politicians, because that's the Trojan war, Trojan horse. You bring in your own intentions by buying the government officials, and then the direction of the country goes wherever the financing is going.
And I would say that's potentially what happened with President Karzai. We pushed for him to be the president.
Yes, yes. Okay, I wanted to ask a question that is valid, I think, for both of you, Carson and David, and you can take turns in answering this. So this was the Capstone experience for you. I always hope that the Capstone experience is not just an exercise to be done and be done with it. I always hope that the students will do these things because it will inform in a way how they want to continue with their lives, either professionally or academically. Maybe you want to go into a master's degree, maybe you want to go into even further, or maybe you want to find a job. But these subjects that you researched here and you presented, do they inform you in any way for, or prepare you as skills for a future job in any field?
I think it increases my interest in policy work, be that in the State Department or in a political office, you know. Or I don't know if I would run for office. I think I would support someone who is and advise them. But you know, it increases my interest there.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of opened my eyes to a lot of the nuances to what's going on. We had a guest speaker right before break, Ron Pakowitz, who worked for the State Department. So I was working on my paper at the same time that he was talking, and it was, you know, the combination of both of those two really piqued my interest in that area.
Yeah, are you aware of, you know, former graduates of our program? There's people who work for JCI International, you know, different structures or organizations here in St. Louis or in Illinois, in Chicago, and so on and so forth. So maybe we should build in time a database of who has been through INTS. And from time to time, if I have the information, how they conduct their work over there, I post on Twitter or on Facebook, the dedicated page for the program. So, you know, in the future, do not just delete us from your accounts. Follow up, because if I have access to any kind of information for jobs, for something that could inspire you, because there's former students of INTS program working over there, it's always, you know, good to have an example.
I agree. I think that'd be great.
You know, now that we have all the Zoom technology, we could have an alumni day and just invite people to come on Zoom. It would be really interesting. Yeah.
That was the person of the International Studies Day in the spring. That's what I did in 2019. But, you know, in 2020, and it looks like in 2021, I will still not be able to organize something in person. But I think at least in the spring, I will organize something virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. So any other questions for the students who defended their papers in INTS 499. Capstone experience. If not, going once, going twice. Very much for your attention, for your time, and I will, transform this recording and put it on YouTube and share with everybody the link so we can be kept into history. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you,
all.
Carson and David. David, that